slowly come to order here. We're at 16. All right. Madam Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. President, I move that the Senate resolve itself into Committee of the Whole.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Senator Smith.
Everybody go. Do we have a quorum? Doesn't look like a quorum to me. All right. Committee of the Whole, please come to order. All right. First bill for our consideration is House Bill 86. Reading clerk, will you read the bill?
House Bill 86 engrossed, Public Property and Buildings Amendments, an act relating to public property and buildings, sponsored by the Appropriations Committee, was referred to Committee Number 2, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes Senators Driscoll, Guru, Larson, Salazar, and Smith. Senator Salazar, Chairman.
Senator Salazar, you've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure, sir?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the Committee of the Whole rise to report it, do so with a recommendation that Senate File 86 do pass. And to discuss this bill, I'll hand it over to the good minority leader. Thank you.
All right. Senator Gru, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I bring you House Bill 86, and there is an amendment. Can I have that read in at this time?
Sure, you may.
House Bill 86, Committee of the Whole Amendment Number 1 to engrossed copy, page 1, line 13, after.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll bring that up for consideration. Is just when I get finished, I'll kind of read in the bill for you.
So go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you. Good members. Hope you had a nice lunch. Everybody's already getting ready to think about this weekend. I got a nice little bill for you. It is the longest bill of the session at 43 pages, but we'll try to get through it as best and with dispatch. I bring you today Senate File 8 or House Bill 86, and this bill was here last year, and it actually failed in this good chamber on third reading. And the folks who brought us this bill originally took all of the good dialogue to heart from that drubbing at the end of the session, and have rebrought it, bring it back today, and have tried to address some major issues. What this bill affects is capital construction, including major maintenance, routine maintenance, and strategic planning. Now, who does this bill affect? It affects state agencies, state-owned buildings, and facilities under the authority of the State Construction Department and the State Construction Commission. Also, University of Wyoming, community colleges, school districts, and other public entities for purposes of non-resident contracting for public works. Now, the four major concepts of this bill, and this is kind of going to be my high-level walkthrough. What this does, number one, it codifies budget provisions related to major maintenance that has been in Section 308 of the current budget. One, also that it ensures major maintenance funds do not automatically revert at the end of each biennium. You can see that on page 13 of the bill. It mandates the use of State Building Commission's major maintenance formula for those affected entities that I listed above. You'll see that on page 15 of the bill. It also requires comprehensive reporting on expenditures and commitments. You'll also see that on page 14 of the bill. Two, consistent terminology, which has always been an issue. Uniform definitions, and consolidates and standardizes definitions for key terms, such as major maintenance, capital construction projects, capital renewal, renovation, routine maintenance, and property across all affected entities to ensure consistency in implementation. You'll see that on pages 5 through 10 of the bill itself. Then 3, routine maintenance requirements. Entities will be required to develop and implement proactive maintenance schedules, which include planning and detailed record keeping. That's on page 14. Requires focus on preventing maintenance backlogs and ensuring that properties with components reach their full life expectancy. Another key provision. This is found in each section, but an example can be found on page 29, line 5 for K-12 education. Other policy changes. It removes the 7-year phase-in requirements for major maintenance funding or for community colleges. And this repealer is found on page 42, section 3. Also, contracting changes. Updates rules for contracting with non-resident contractors on public works projects. You'll see that on page 18. Supplemental funding permits additional requests when allocated funds are inadequate for repairs. See page 16, item K, and on page 30 and 31 of the bill for that. Strategic planning establishes a plan for tracking and reporting capital construction and maintenance expenditures. You can find that on page 12 of the bill. Folks, this is a major undertaking by our state, our folks over at State Construction, who really feel this is an avenue and really a nation's leader in trying to put together a maintenance plan that kind of covers all those enterprises and try to put us on a footing where we can maximize the money that we have been spending over the past few years with our K-12 schools, at the university. You know, we know at the university in the last few years, we've spent almost $290 million in building dorms and new facilities, all the construction at K through 12. All of this spending requires a lot of major maintenance as it moves forward, and we want to make sure that we wring every dollar and make sure that we're getting the best and the most out of each piece of equipment. In addition, what this bill does, and this we got from testimony in committee from groups like the builders, the major high-ranking builders association, we call them that, or some of the other trade groups that we've talked to, so that this legislation will provide them the ability to put on employees to be able to do this work as these works come up, so they can look out on a line in 2, 3, and 5-year increments, and then see that they can hire employees and know with confidence that they can keep those employees in state, providing good jobs, so those folks can go around and work and provide these services. To do all this and to implement it, though, is going to require some funding. So now on to the amendment. I submit to you, that would be Committee of the Whole, Amendment Number 1 to House Bill 86. What this does is provide $750,000 in funding for the SBC to implement this project. Folks, this was put in the budget on the House side and did not have a mirror on the Senate side, and so we wanted to try to put it in front of you to give you an opportunity to vote on it, to put it in this bill, and then whichever way it comes out in the budget, then we'll be able to move forward. So at this time, I would move Amendment Number 1 to Senate File 86 and ask for your favorable consideration.
All right, any discussion on the bill, on the amendment? All right. Seeing no discussion. All those in favor of Senator Salazar's motion to adopt Committee of the Whole Amendment Number 1 to House Bill 86, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say no. No. The chair is in doubt. So all those in favor, please stand.
$750,000.
This is the amendment. 11 ayes. All those opposed to the amendment, please stand. Eleven ayes and 12 noes. The amendment fails. On to the bill.
I'd be glad now, since you've decided that you don't want to fund it, I've decided now to stand for any questions on this good little bill. Hearing none, Doug.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I think it's important, good senators, to recognize the seriousness and importance of this bill in front of you. It's been worked for a couple of years. It actually is the strongest tool that we have in order to get a handle on major maintenance in our state, which is an unwieldy continuing increase in cost, particularly as it relates to K through 12 in different state buildings. And this provides that one solid, consistent framework and modernizes the statute to ensure that we are all working from the same playbook with the same expectations for how our buildings are to be maintained. This is a cost-saving bill. It's an important bill, and I really do think it's going to transform how we're dealing with our state buildings, K through 12 buildings, and getting a handle on how that maintenance works. So I know it's late in the afternoon and everybody's been asking me to get out of here at noon. We will not be doing that today, so buckle up. We have work to do, senators. This is a good bill, and it's really important, I think, to the future of our state and our bottom line. So I encourage your careful consideration of this bill.
Thank you, Senator Nethercott. I think Senator Landon, I think you were next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to pick up on where the majority floor leader was going, you know, fellow senators, this has been lurking for quite some time. We actually, those of us in this room, have inherited things from 40 and 50 years ago, 35 years ago. For a period of about 20 years, Mr. Chairman, Wyoming, quite frankly, didn't do a very good job. We were out of money. We had a very big downturn in the economy during the 80s. Many of us remember that. The 90s, same thing. And we didn't take care of anything. And so part of the expense of what we talk about every year, every couple years down here with regard to major maintenance or renewal or whatever might be the case on some of these older buildings, let alone the new construction that we talk about, is partly a result of the lack of action years ago. Our buildings got so run down that we have been playing catch up ever since. And that's why I think this bill is important. It puts a framework together so that future legislators will have a guidebook as to what are we going to do with all these state buildings. We're actually borrowing a lot of the principles that we've employed on the school front. We've needed that on the capital construction state side of things because we do have a lot of buildings. We learned a lot in this building, you know, how far down we went. We almost lost this building. It was literally sitting on the dirt. And thank God we were able to save it and resurrect it. But at any rate, I hope that helps put in perspective the reason why this was worked on the last 2 to 4 to 5 years to put this plan in place is to get a framework, you know, so that we understand what we're dealing with. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Salazar, you were next if you're good. Okay, Senator Pappas, go right ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to pile on as well. I've been arguing for the last 10 years in this body that I've been here about issues like this as a practicing architect and someone in the construction business and understanding the needs of maintenance and the cost of maintenance. We, as a body, the legislature, tend to kick this thing down the road all the time. And I can just tell you how much money we always lose because we don't take care of our facilities and our assets. We let them go, and then it costs us buku money. So I urge you to support this bill, to pass this bill. It is the right thing to do. We have a fiduciary responsibility. And I think that you ought to take that seriously and not just nickel dime our facilities. And as your liaison to the State Building Commission, I see how we spend these dollars. And sometimes I shake my head when they forward things to us, and then we just, we think we know better, and we defund things that really need to be done in the state. So on and for the bill.
Okay. All right. Question's been called, seeing no further discussion. All those in favor of Senator Salazar's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report, they do so with favorable recommendation of House Bill 86, say aye. All those opposed, say no. All right, so House Bill 86 has passed committee of the whole. The next bill for your consideration is House Bill 199. Would the clerk please read it in?
House Bill 199 engrossed, Wyoming Freedom Scholarship Act, an act relating to education, sponsored by Representative Andrew. It was referred to committee number 4, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Brennan, Olson, and Scott. No, Senators Rothfuss and Schuler. Senator Schuler, chairman. Was re-referred to committee number 2, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Driscoll, Larson, Salazar, and Smith. No, Senator Garou. Senator Salazar, chairman.
Senator Schuler, Chairman Schuler, you have heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure? You'll need to be unmuted. There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the committee of the whole rises report it, do so with a recommendation that it's not Senate file, House Bill 199 do pass, and I'm going to turn the time over to the good senator from Cheyenne to talk about the bill.
Go ahead, Senator Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is House Bill 199, the Wyoming Freedom Scholarship Act. This is amendments, and I think this is important to note. This goes in and amends some of the ESA program that we did last year. So just for reference, some of this bill is better understood in the context of laws that were passed last year. Page 1, I will go ahead and walk us through the bill. Page 1 is just the title of the bill. We go over to page 2, where we start with section 1. In section 1, we go into Wyoming Statute 94601, and we amend that. This is the funding mechanism. Currently, the funding for this is on the general fund. This would change the funding mechanism, and it would take, let me see what lines. Down around lines 13 and 14, we go into, and basically what this does is it takes some of the mineral royalty funds that go into the, I'm gonna get my words mixed up here, school foundation fund program, and it takes like 200 million, we tip that in. Anything that's not used in this account would tip back to the school foundation account. So this section would amend from the general fund to this. On page 3, we start section 2. Section 2, over on lines 3, this is where we amend Wyoming Education Savings Account to Freedom Scholarship Act. On page 4, line 16, we take out the pre-kindergarten portion of this program. On page 5, we so currently, if you're at 150% of the poverty level, you qualify for $6,000 This strikes that part, and this is where we go to a universal savings account. This would give each student who qualifies the ability to have up to $7,000. This is based on currently what the average is for private schools in the state of Wyoming. I would also note on this $7,000, it's not just a check of $7,000 that goes straight to parents. From the bill that we passed last year, the department has promulgated rules, and we also had a list of things that were approved expenses. So they go through the department where they have to submit proof of what is being purchased or has been purchased through an online, kind of like your online Amazon for education, is how that works. That is not discussed in this bill because it's already in statute. I just want to make that all clear, as that has been some confusion about that. And then we have, part of the reason why there's so many pages is every time we have education savings account, we change that to the Freedom Scholarship Program. We are doing $30 million for this program. That's on page 6. On page 7, we don't change, we add a little bit of language on lines 9 on who can get this. It's subject to the availability of the funds as determined by the legislature. Any child who is a Wyoming resident who has not graduated from high school or received a high school equivalency certificate and who is eligible to attend a public school in this state would be eligible for this. We do some renumbering on page 10. Page 11, we talk about an eligible student who receives funds, and we talk about a sibling of an eligible student would be eligible. Then we go on to duties as a state superintendent and their duties under this. There's a little bit more on just the state superintendent and how they're gonna just do things and promulgate rules. And then some liability, and then at section 4, section 5, we have that $30,000, or nope, I can't read. Let's get the zeros right. $30 million for the grant, and then this act is effective immediately. We do have some standing committee amendments, and if we could have those read.
Actually, if I could, real fast, we had something that really happened. I'm going to give privilege of the floor to Senator Culp.
Represent this area. This is in Stacy's Senate District, but right next to mine. There's been a crash in the tunnels, an explosion in the Green River tunnels, in the westbound lane. There's multiple fatalities. They can't get to them. The tunnel itself is collapsing. They're sending out YDOT right now to investigate, and they believe it was from a semi hauling transformers that the oil caught on fire. And it's an ongoing event, and it's going to be pretty devastating for the area, and most importantly for those folks that lost their lives. I guess a moment of silence, if we could.
Okay. Well, Lord, we just ask that you be with the people that are in this accident. Lord, we just pray that you just would be with the rescue teams that are going in. Lord, just give them supernatural wisdom. We just pray for life. We pray for those whose lives hang in the balance, Lord. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Senator Senator Jones a moment also.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Senator Jones, go ahead.
I was just standing up in support of my county.
All right. Well, if you can hear us, Sweetwater County, our thoughts and prayers are with you, and appreciate you bringing that, Senator Kolb. Senator Brennan, would you continue with the amendments? What?
Yeah, the standing committee amendments, Senator Olson is going to explain those.
Oh, okay. Would the clerk please read in the first standing committee amendment?
House Bill 199, Standing Committee Amendment Number 1 to engross copy, page 1 above line 1 in.
Go ahead, Senator Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I do move Standing Committee Amendment Number 1 to Senate File 199 and ask for your favorable consideration. Folks, we talked about possibly dividing this amendment out, but I'm actually not going to do that because I think it's actually it's not that complicated. If we get into it and there are certain areas that you want to divide out, I can definitely assist you with doing that. But overall, this amendment is not really that complicated. It does 4 things. The first thing that it does deals with accountability, and that's on page 8 of the bill. So this is the testing portion of individuals receiving the scholarship. So at the bottom of page 8 is language from last year's statute that required that anyone receiving an ESA scholarship or ESA money take a statewide assessment or a nationally normed achievement exam. And so the first thing, and probably one of the most important things that this amendment does, is it brings that stricken language back into the bill. So just to be clear, if a student is receiving a $7,000 scholarship, whether they are homeschooled or at a private school, they will be required to either take the statewide assessment, which or a nationally normed achievement exam. So it doesn't have to be the YTOP exam. It can be an SAT or an ACT, for example. So that's the first thing that the amendment does, Mr. Chairman. The second thing that the amendment does is it renames the scholarship. So under this bill, the scholarship is known as the Wyoming Freedom Scholarship Act. Your Committee on Education thought about this and wondered how we could make the scholarship name as Wyoming as possible. And nothing is more Wyoming than the Buck and Horse and Rider. So we thought, how can we bring the Buck and Horse and Rider into this bill? And the state of Wyoming's first use of the Buck and Horse and Rider, as many of you know, dates back to 1918. The Buck and Horse and Rider was used as an insignia worn by members of the Wyoming National Guard in France and Germany during World War I. The Buck and Horse and Rider is representative of the legendary rodeo horse named Steamboat, dating back to the early 1900s. One of the best-known bucking horses of all time, Steamboat was known as the horse that couldn't be ridden. And then again in 1936, of course, Wyoming's unique license plate contained the Buck and Horse and Rider. It made its debut. Steamboat is Wyoming, and so we're asking to rename the scholarship through this amendment to the Steamboat Legacy Scholarship Act. That's the second thing, Mr. Chairman, that this amendment does. Third thing this amendment does deals with certification. If you go back to page 8 of your bill, there's some language on lines 11 through 18 dealing with certification. So what this is it requires that a student receiving a scholarship be educated in the following, and then there's a list. We are striking from the list in studies of the U.S. Constitution and the state of Wyoming. So the list would require that each student receiving the scholarship be, at a minimum, receive instruction in reading, writing, mathematics, civics, which hopefully civics includes the constitutions of the United States and Wyoming, history, literature, and science. That's the list. And so the reason for this is to tighten it up and actually make it consistent with existing law. So currently a private school, only Wyoming's public schools are required to teach the United States Constitution and the Wyoming Constitution. A private school or a homeschooler is not required to be taught those. And so this would actually be consistent with how our law is written right now. That's the third thing, Mr. Chairman, that this amendment does. And then the last thing, the fourth thing, is a legal change. If you go to page 16 of the bill, subsection C, lines 4 through 12, the amendment strikes the last sentence, so the language that says, "For the purpose of judicial administration, a court may require that all parents file a joint brief, as long as the parents are not required to join any brief filed on behalf of any named state defendant." That language is legally problematic. From the attorneys on the second floor, they specifically requested that this language be deleted, and we agreed with them. Mr. Chairman, that's the amendment. I'll certainly take any questions on it.
All right. Discussion. Senator Hicks, go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, and it gets to the name change, and I'm just wondering, how many people in Wyoming know the name of that bucking horse? And for the people that live in my corner of the state that live down there close to a town in Colorado, they're gonna think this is the Colorado Scholarship in Wyoming. And then my colleagues up in Sheridan County, they think they got a scholarship named after a rock as you drive up over the Bighorn Mountains there, and you got a rock up there named Steamboat Rock. And so I think it adds a lot of confusion. But I do understand the symbolism of that we're changing it of a world record bucking horses. So this is what we're doing is we're throwing off the public education system. And so the symbolism there is not lost on me, that this is to throw off the shackles of the rider of the public education system and get to that issue. So I just curious, I don't want any confusion, but it sure looks to me that the symbolism is very, very important that we send that message out.
Go ahead, Senator Olson.
Mr. Chairman, it sounds like I may have to work with the good senator on a second reading amendment to include instruction on Steamboat as part of the certification for receiving one of these scholarships.
Go ahead, Senator Brennan.
Mr. Chairman, when we do work on that amendment, I think, one of the good senators I was talking to about this before we brought this amendment was that we might need to require also a tattoo of Steamboat for anybody who receives this scholarship. So, but open to that amendment too.
That'd be consistent with Brian.
Senator Craigo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just a question on the amendment, and I'm just trying to read it in my good desk mate here was talking about language on page 8 regarding the Constitution, which would be included in lines 11 through 18, and removing the requirement that they study the Wyoming and U.S. Constitution. And I might just be missing it. I just don't see it on the actual amendment. And so I was just curious if we could point that out to me.
Senator Olson, go ahead.
So, Mr. Chairman, I believe that is page 2 of the amendment. Lines 11 through 23 deal with certification. And I don't have the amendment in front of me, but let's take a look. Page 2, lines 11 through 23, strike in. So where it says in, and then the next strike kindergarten through 12th grade, and then strike including studies, and then strike entirely. So I think it strikes out the remainder of the balance of the entire, it strikes the entire language and rewrites it. Oh, I'm gonna get back to you on that one. Let's take a look at it.
Senator Hutchings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not really certain if my question is the same as the senators before me, but it really concerns me that you want to take out the study of the Wyoming and U.S. constitutions. I think I heard you say only the public schools require that via our statutes, but this seems pretty important. So maybe I'm off a little bit, so I stepped out.
Go ahead, Senator Olson.
Mr. Chairman, I stand corrected. Looking at the amendment this is on page 8 of your bill, would be where the certification language exists, and that is not stricken from the bill as part of that amendment.
Sweet.
All right. Further discussion?
Gotcha, gotcha, gotcha.
Seeing no further, Senator Brennan, go ahead.
Sorry, I think while we figure out, because there might be kind of some drafting issues on that amendment, I will address it. It was language that the superintendent had asked for. The reason being is that as it's written and stands, we've got civics before this, which would include the United States Constitution, the Wyoming Constitution, and then we have history after that. And we're saying instead of needing to study those things every single year, that those would be wrapped in with your civics and your history. And there was also a concern that if you got up into maybe your high school years and you had a more technical school or education that you were going to, how would some of that fit in doing that every year? So I think it is a policy decision for the body, but that was the reason for the amendment.
Okay. Senator Olson?
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I think I finally have my bearings straight, thanks to my good desk mate. So during my presentation of the amendment, I was on the wrong page. If you go to page 12 of your bill, the amendment strikes the word "in" at the end of line 1, and then continues kindergarten through grade 12 on line 2, skips down to line 3, including studies, stricken, and then all of line 4 is stricken, and line 5 stricken through state of Wyoming. So it does remove the requirement that the U.S. Constitution, Wyoming Constitution specifically be taught. And again, the reason for that is because it is consistent with existing state law. So currently, we do not require a private school to teach that. And we do not require a homeschooler to be taught in that way. So remember, this bill is only going to apply to private students and homeschoolers. So this is a policy choice for the body, absolutely. If you believe that any student receiving this scholarship there should be a certification that they were in fact taught the U.S. and Wyoming Constitution, then that's fine. We can divide that out of the amendment and we can address that separately. But again, the purpose is to be consistent with what we currently do in Wyoming, and we don't require those certifications for homeschoolers and private kids.
Senator Higgs?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, and I understand that when it's homeschooled or it's a private school because you're using your own funding. Now we're using public funding, and I would say because of that, we probably want to be more consistent to require the teaching of the constitutions for that reason, because so it's different. What we're doing here is different than private or homeschooling, and so we can work on that maybe as a second amendment, but I see it as completely different issues there.
Okay. Senator Lennon, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to go back to page 8, lines 20 through 22. The way I read this proposed standing committee amendment, we are putting that language back in. I'd like to learn a little bit more about what exactly, what that statewide assessment is. Are we talking about the 4th grade and 8th grade assessments, or maybe a little bit more about what we're putting back in there? And by the way, I stand in favor of that and really appreciate the work of the committee on that front. We can certainly talk about that Constitution piece a little bit later, but I think this puts back in all of the requirement for some assessments that our public school students would undertake as well, right? That's the question.
Senator Brennan, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the US and Wyoming Constitution, I'll check and see what's required of public schools currently on that, if it's a yearly thing or if it's into certain years. I know we do require civics and history, but I'll get a better answer for us on that. As far as the testing, we just go back to, this just takes us back to what's in current law, which says that if you take these funds, then you have to be tested either by the statewide assessment test
or a nationally normed exam. So either one of those would be fine, so they could take our national school test, or state test, sorry, or nationally normed exam. There's multiple nationally normed exams out there that would be fairly easy. I've ordered them before for one of my children to get a nationally normed exam that you take online for about $50, I think. So either one of those, if we go back to the normal language, just gives a little bit more of, your testing, making sure the students are learning and progressing over the year.
All right. Senator Jones, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I was just wondering, what happens if, after the assessments that the children that we're talking about here are failing? Where do we go from there? And what's our responsibility to make sure that all kids learn in an appropriate manner?
Senator Brennan?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that. Great question. The same thing, the irony of this all is that we test. Every year in the public schools, our kids take tests and nothing really changes. It's the same. And so would a test change anything? I think in this case, what you would find is that these are gonna be parents who are gonna change what they're doing to make sure that their students improve year over year. I think you will see that, but currently we just look at that data in the public schools and nothing really changes. So kind of the same thing.
All right. Seeing there's no further discussion, somebody want to call the question? All right. Question's been called, so all those in favor of Senator Schuler's motion to adopt the Standing Committee of the Whole Amendment Number 1 to House Bill 199, please say aye. All those opposed say no. The chair is in doubt. All those in favor, please rise. All those opposed, please rise. All right, 16 ayes and 10 noes. The amendment passes. All right, on to the bill and on to the next amendment. Standing Committee amendment. Go ahead, Senator Brennan.
I think we need to have that amendment read in, please.
Would you read that in, Mr. Clerk?
House Bill 199, Standing Committee Amendment Number 2 to engross copy, page 1, line 4, delete.
You want this?
Hang on, go ahead.
I don't care. You're fine.
Senator Olson.
This is the appropriation, right? Okay. Mr. Chairman, so I do move Standing Committee, or Committee of the Whole Amendment Number 1 to Senate File 199.
Number 2.
Sorry. Move Standing Committee Amendment Number 1, Number 2.
Number 2.
I move Standing Committee Amendment Number 2, I promise it's not Friday, to House Bill 199, and do ask for your favorable consideration. So, folks, this is a really critical amendment that goes to the heart of the, could be arguably the constitutionality of this bill. Under the current funding mechanism of the bill, there's a one-time appropriation, and then ongoing, the scholarship is funded by the FMRs. A portion is peeled off of the FMR to fund it. What this amendment does is leaves the FMRs alone and does a straight general fund for the one-time and straight general fund for the ongoing appropriation to fund the scholarship. And at least in my mind, my simple analysis of it, you're trying to get your funding mechanism as far away from school foundation dollars as you can possibly be. And a portion of the FMR goes to school foundation dollars. So I think that one could make the argument that this scholarship is taking money from the school foundation account, money that would have gone to the school foundation account, and that creates a constitutional issue. So the idea of the amendment is just that simple, to move it as far away from the FMRs as you can go, or from the school foundation as you can get. Your only other alternative would be to take it out of savings. Obviously, I don't think anyone wants to rob our savings account to do that, the rainy day fund. So the general fund just makes the most amount of sense. And I'll take any questions, Mr. Chairman.
All right, questions? Go ahead, Senator Hicks.
So, Mr. Chairman, I don't disagree with my colleague, but make no bones about it, there is federal mineral royalties that go to the general fund too. It's just blended into the very large fund. School Foundation program does the same thing, but it's a much, much smaller percentage of the general fund, but there's still FMRs that go into the general fund. And so, but I do think it makes it a little bit cleaner to do it that way.
Thank you, Senator Hicks. We have a small logistical problem. There's only one person from appropriations here in the room right now, and that's me. And this has to be moved from appropriations since it came out of appropriations. So with the parliamentarian, I think what I want to do here, were you going to speak to this? Okay, go ahead.
It's acceptable. It's in order for anyone to make that motion. And if we don't have somebody, I believe actually, good Senator Olson made the motion, moved that amendment. So everything's in order and
Okay.
We can proceed.
All right. Question's been called. All right. All those in favor of Senator Schuler's motion to, Senator Olson's motion to adopt Standing Committee of the Whole Amendment Number 2 to House Bill 199. Didn't I say that? What did I say? Oh, Standing Committee Amendment Number 2 to House Bill 199. Please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say no. All right, that amendment passes. We're going to go ahead and do the other two amendments, as well, the Committee of the Whole amendments. So, Senator Brennan, did you? Oh, Senator Schuler, go ahead, and we'll have it read in.
House Bill 199, Committee of the Whole Amendment Number 1 to engross copy, page 1, line 6, delete.
Oh, here you go, here you go. Getting there for you, boom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I will move Committee of the Whole Amendment Number 1 to House Bill 199 and ask for your favorable consideration. I brought this amendment, I think our whole committee basically is trying to figure out how to get past some of the constitutional things that are in this bill. We don't want to see, as much as we like lawyers, I don't think we want to see a lot of our bills get hung up in the courts. So this amendment basically, it goes back to an income-based situation. So if you take a look at your bill, on the first page, it just deletes increasing the maximum scholarship award and inserts modifying the amounts to be deposited in students' accounts. If you go over on page 5, then it goes into the different amounts based on the income level. So $6,000 would go to students whose household income is equal to or less than 150%. Romanet 2, $4,800 for students that are at the 150%, more than 150%, the poverty level, but equal to or less than the 200%. Romanet 3, the $3,600 for students whose household income is more than 200% of the federal poverty level, but equal to or less than 250% of the federal poverty level. So the last part there, no amount shall be deposited into an educational savings account for students whose household income is greater than 250%. Just to give you an idea, that 250% of the federal poverty, I can't say it today, level, a single person would be about $38,000, a family of 3 about $64,000, family of 6 would be about $104,000. So just to give you an idea, the thing is, so many articles in our Wyoming Constitution that go back to, if something's not for the benefit of the poor, and we use public money for private or religious institutions, we're in trouble. You can go back and look in Article 1, Section 19, Article 3, Section 36, Article 7, Section 8, Article 7, Section 12, Article 16, Section 6, and Article 21, Section 28. So basically, it prohibits us from giving money to those organizations unless it is for the benefit of the poor. I believe that these income bases that we have here would get us past the constitutionality, but it might not. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but I did have some of the lawyers take a look at this, and I think it might get us where we need to go. And I don't know if you have had as many as I've had, emails, texts, phone calls, probably in the thousands. There are a lot of folks that are upset that, and of course, some of them don't understand how this works, but they think we're just going to give a $7,000 check, which that's not exactly how this works. The money, the way it is now, it would just go to the state superintendent, and obviously then they would turn the receipts in, the parent, and they would decide from there whether or not those are acceptable. I went back and looked at some of the other states. Yeah, 7,000 is a little high, even if you look at some of the other ones that have gone to universal. So I went back and looked at those expenditures. And, even if you take a look, I looked at maybe 3 or 4 different educational service providers. Some of them a couple $1,000s, maybe $3,000. So that leaves you a lot of money. If you go $7,000 for, that's a pretty nice computer. That's pretty nice supplies and equipment. So I think, going back to having this income-based and having it based on the poverty level will get us where we need to go to get past the constitutional issues. If you don't feel that way, again, vote against this, but if you want to see the bill go forward and not get hung up in the courts, I think we've got to try to do what we can to amend this so that we can make it available. And I do want to see it go through, because I think there are parents out there that would like some different options than what we have. So this was my attempt to try to bring it to where it was similarly in the bill last year, and see what happens. So with that, I'm happy to answer questions.
All right, discussion. Senator Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to just push back and cautious us a little bit with this amendment. First of all, we're talking about kids here. Kids who don't make an income, and they are born to the parents who, some are born into wealthy families and some aren't. But when we go to this means testing, then we're automatically saying, well, some of you kids, because you weren't born into wealth, then this is fine for you. But some of you, this is okay, and some of you, we don't really care about, because your parents aren't going to make enough to send you to private school, which in the state of Wyoming is about, the average is $6,000, depending on what counties you're in per student per year. And some parents aren't going to fall into that, but they're not going to be able to afford this. We talk about equitability for students all the time, but with this amendment, we take out that equitability and we say, you know what, we're going to make sure that those that are really poor can go, and those that are born into super rich can go. But if you're a child of a working class family, then we don't care. It disturbs me that we don't look at our children and say, these are our kids, these are our most precious value. What's good for one child is good for another child. We also talked about the cost. Is it going to cost $7,000 to homeschool a child? Unless you have a really expensive online program, it's probably not. They're probably not going to use that full $7,000. But that student that's going to that private school, they are, and this is for both of those. So I think that this $7,000 is a very reasonable amount of money. I don't think that we should call out winners and losers, especially with our children. I think our children are all precious. They should all be treated equally, and so I oppose this amendment.
Actually, Senator Scott was next, and then Senator Olson.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, on and against this amendment. Education, Mr. Chairman, is one of the most fundamental services that our state and local governments provide. We have never had a means test on education. It's something that's been available to all. And the K-12 system has always been public, so this is a little different. But there are a couple of precedents we can look at. And they're in the education area on either side of the age spectrum of the K-12 system. We've never, to my knowledge, restricted the funding for the preschool child development centers that deal with particularly the kids with developmental disabilities. Never been restricted on an income basis that I know of. We've never had any trouble with it, Mr. Chairman. On the other side, the precedent is the university, and there it's in the Constitution. It doesn't say tuition is going to be free, it says it's going to be as nearly free as possible. So it's really telling us to subsidize the higher education as much as we can without regard to income. So I think we're setting a bad precedent if we put an income test in this one. Mr. Chairman, we could do it for non-constitutional reasons to try to save money, I suppose, but I don't think it's a good idea. So, Mr. Chairman, I don't think there's a constitutional reason. Maybe the real lawyers in the body will have opinions on that. Maybe they won't. But I think we're setting a bad precedent that way. So on and against the amendment.
All right, Senator Olson, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted, on and against this amendment as well. I think that if you support school choice, you support it for all students, regardless of their income. But what I wanted to address was the Article 3, Section 36 citation that public dollars can't be used for religious organizations. And the United States Supreme Court has been very clear on this, that any provision in a state constitution that says that money can't be appropriated to a religious institution is unconstitutional under the Free Exercise Clause. So that shouldn't be a concern for this body. That was a 2020 Supreme Court case where the Montana Supreme Court was overturned for that under that exact analysis. So I just wanted to bring that to the body's attention, and so that they can feel comfortable in the fact that these dollars may end up going to a student at a parochial school, and that would be held entirely constitutional.
Senator Roth, let's go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, on and for the amendment. I want to start with that last point about the Montana case. That's a misinterpretation of the case. And I think it's important to realize that that case did not say that any state constitution that says that you can't give money to a religious school is now overridden. What that case said was, for that particular state up north of us, they had a program that provided direct funding to private schools. And when it started, it was private schools that were not religious schools. And what the court said was, you cannot discriminate if you're giving to private schools and exclude religious schools. It did not say, and therefore you have to give money to religious schools. Quite the contrary. So if we have an exclusion, Mr. Chairman, in statute, which we do, indicating that these public funds cannot be going to private religious schools, that's not obviated by that Supreme Court decision. What it means is that you cannot be giving funds to any type of private school, and you can't discriminate on a religious basis. I understand that this has been a common argument that's been made, but it's an illogical interpretation of that argument. The Supreme Court absolutely did not say the state of Wyoming is obligated to give funds to religious schools. That is a misinterpretation, and I think it's important to correct that. Getting to the concept, though, Mr. Chairman, that this is unfair if we have a means testing, because we're picking winners, we're picking losers, and we only like some kids. Mr. Chairman, we have a statewide public education system that is closed to none. It doesn't matter what your background is, it doesn't matter what your financial situation is, it doesn't matter whether you're IDEA identified, it doesn't matter anything about your personal profile. You are welcome in the Wyoming Public Schools. That's the obligation of the state. The state is under no obligation to fund private schools. And the idea that we're picking winners and losers by only providing funding for those that can't afford it is honestly a valiant attempt at trying to make this constitutional, because we do have the capacity under the Constitution to provide support for the poor. That would be the only tenuous link to constitutionality, because the plain language in the Constitution in Article 7, Section 8, related to funding for schools, indicates that nor shall any portion of any public school fund ever be used to support or assist any private school or any school, academy, seminary, college, or other institution of learning controlled by any church or sectarian organization or religious denomination whatsoever. Mr. Chairman, that's some of the strongest wording in this wonderful document. It is clear and unambiguous. I do understand that there has been an attempt to say, all right, well, this is very specific to certain dollars that are painted a certain color within the way we funding through the legislature. And I guess it's possible maybe the court will buy into that idea. But the idea that we're trying to circumvent the clear and obvious intent of the Constitution to not provide public funds to private schools is something that I think will be very clear and apparent to the Supreme Court. It will be obvious, whether they're general fund, school foundation, mineral revenues, anything else. These are funds of the state and in clear violation of Section 8. This amendment tries to at least latch on to a provision of the Constitution that allows for support for the poor. If we pass this, again, tenuously constitutional, but still potentially invalid. If we don't pass this amendment, in my view, Mr. Chairman, wildly unconstitutional, and clearly so.
Senator Scott, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, this raises the fundamental constitutional question in this bill. And, Mr. Chairman, a few years ago, Joint Education Committee, as part of our interim work, held a hearing on this particular issue to see what was proper and what wasn't. And we had a number of legal opinions furnished to us, Mr. Chairman. One of them you've just heard articulated on this particular provision, which is Article 7, Section 8. That provision, there are 5 provisions ahead of this, describing and dedicating certain revenues to the schools. And then Section 8 says, provision shall be made by general law for equitable allocation of such income, meaning all this income they're talking about, among all the schools, districts, and state. But no appropriation shall be made from said fund to any district for any year in which school has not been maintained for at least 3 months. Different standard in those days. Nor shall any portion of any public school fund ever be used to support or assist any private school or any school academy, etc., controlled by any church, sectarian organization, or religious denomination whatsoever. It sounds very clear that the advice we got from the outside legal counsel with experience in this area was that that provision is specific to the funds that are dedicated by this Constitution to the public schools, and that funds, state funds that were not so dedicated are not covered by the specific language in this amendment. And though that legal counsel had had considerable experience in other states which have very similar or identical provisions. This is what is sometimes referred to as the Blaine Amendment, was very commonly put into place in the, about the time of Wyoming statehood, all across the country, really to prevent funding of Catholic parochial schools, bluntly, Mr. Chairman. My conclusion at the end of that interim committee hearing on this subject was that there is a good legal argument on both sides of this issue. And we don't really know what the case is going to be here in Wyoming until we have a test case with the Wyoming courts. If the courts adopt one interpretation, we're fine with this funding mechanism. We don't need the amendment. We're fine with the bill as it is. If the Wyoming courts adopt the other interpretation to get school choice, we're going to have a constitutional amendment. I think, I don't know, and maybe the real lawyers in the room will weigh in too. I don't think any of us can definitively say how that court test is going to come out. I think it's important to have it, and the sooner the better, because we have a need for this option. Because too many families are being failed by our current public education system. This gives them an opportunity to get education outside of it, and we need to find out, can we do it under the existing Constitution, or are we going to have to amend it? And it's just not clear, Mr. Chairman. So, on and against the amendment, and on and for the bill.
Senator Landon, bring us home.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is, I know it's getting later, but this is our opportunity, Committee of the Whole, on one of the biggest bills of the session. So let's sit back and let's talk a little bit more about this bill. So no question that whatever comes to a Supreme Court or goes to a court of any manner, of course we have an argument. That's what we hire attorneys for, Mr. Chairman. I think what this amendment comes down to is, what do we think is fair? So to take it to the streets and blocks of my neighborhood, I have friends who already have their children in a private school. It's church affiliated, and they're paying the tuition, and all of their kids are going. Day after tomorrow, when this passes, we're gonna set up $7,000 apiece if we don't pass this one. Meanwhile, we have all kinds of families who cannot afford to even think about sending their students to a school like that. This is fair. The families who cannot even think about going to that school that I just referenced are going to get $6,000 a year for each of those kids. Those who are a little better off are still, the 250% of poverty level, still going to receive $3,600 per student. Mr. Chairman, I have wondered all along with this bill, why the 7,000? That's a benchmark that I think deserves a lot of conversation. This seems very fair to me, given the circumstance that I just described. We already have families who can do this, and they're doing it. on and for the amendment.
Senator Brannan, and then. You can go to Pearson. Okay, all right. Senator Pearson, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in our Constitution, under Article 7, it says legislature to provide for public schools. The legislature shall provide for the establishment and maintenance of a complete and uniform system of public instruction, embracing free elementary schools of every needed kind and grade. So public instruction means instruction funded by the public and not what we have named our school system in Wyoming, public school, of every needed kind. This is currently a needed kind in our environment today. I'm against this amendment. Thank you.
All right, well, it's Senator Schuler and then Senator Brannan. Go ahead, Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, this amendment was just basically trying to fix the language in our Constitution so that we can get past litigation. If you think that $7,000 and, away we go, it's not getting up the courts, I think you're wrong. Let me just go ahead one more time. The plain language of Article 16, Section 6 prohibits the state in the broadest sense from making donations or aiding individuals except for the necessary support of the poor. That's all we're trying to do here, is try to give the kids who really probably need it and the parents who probably need it. And as my good senator back here mentioned, $6,000 is still going to go probably to the poorest of the poor. So we're not really, we're not off much. But again, those people that are making, if the family of 3 is making $65,000, and maybe they have 2 kids, do they need $14,000? I don't know. It says here that we're still going to give them $3,600. So they're still going to get $7,200 for those 2 children. So just again, Article 3, Section 36, it provides that appropriations to individuals or entities not under the absolute control of the state are prohibited. So if we don't add in, and again, I know that I don't know that the courts have ruled on what is the necessary support or what poor actually means in their terms, but to me, I think we've covered it in this amendment, and it seems like we're kind of getting off the rails because we're talking about trying to get to the constitutionality of this bill, and I do think there is an issue. And so, again, I'm just trying to help it across the finish line by adding these things, and if you think that the courts are going to go with it without any kind of a income base, then vote this down. If you want to try and save the bill, I think you should probably take a real serious look at it. And bottom line is, as a former teacher, I do care about every kid, the state of Wyoming. I care about my grandkids, but I cared about every kid that I taught. I taught thousands of kids. I think every teacher, I don't care if you're in a public school, private school, or your home school or whatever, we all care about our kids. And everyone's trying to do the very best they can. And then also just to tie on to the good senator from Albany County, the Supreme Court, the US Supreme Court has ruled on a couple different cases, not only the state north of us, but another state on the far east, it starts with an M as well. And the bottom line is they both had the same ideas. They wanted to provide money for their private schools, but they didn't want to provide money for their religious schools. That's where the US Supreme Court got involved, and they ruled both of those unconstitutional. So those don't really pertain to this, because we're providing money for both, as well as homeschool. And just last but not least, I had a really good testimony from one of my former students who came and testified on this bill. He homeschools his kids. He lives here in Cheyenne now. And he said, listen, I make good money. I would never take this. I would never take this money. Not because I don't want to be involved with anything the government tells me to do, but I don't need it. So that option is there. There's going to be people out here that don't need the money, won't take the money. There might even be even folks in here that homeschool their kids who wouldn't be interested. I don't know. But the bottom line is it's just an option. It's just another way to see if we can get this bill across the finish line. If you see it as being too challenging, then vote it down. But I would hope that you would at least give it a second thought. Thank you.
Senator Bennett, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As far as Article 16, Section 6 goes, they're talking about loans of credit, donations, and the education savings accounts, they're not loan, it's not a credit, it's not a donation. What we're doing is we're funding a program that then allows individuals to choose alternative school choice for their children. So I would argue that Article 16, Section 6 does not apply to this bill. As far as also the good senator in the back brought up, you know, maybe this is good because it does help the poorer on this amendment, but what do we tell our constituents that want to send their kids to private school and they're at 201% of the poverty level or 210% of the poverty level? They can't necessarily afford to send their kids to private schools, but we've said you don't make little enough to do that. So just a couple of things to think about as we decide on this amendment.
Senator Salazar, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, first of all, my wife and I are homeschoolers. We don't want any of this money, so I don't have a dog in this fight to the extent that I would ever take this money. But I guess I'm a little confused. So we're reducing how much money the scholarship is under this amendment to make it more constitutional. If that's the case, why don't we just make it 0 and then we don't have to worry about anything? Reducing education funding for a student in Wyoming to make it more constitutional. Does that make sense?
Thank you, Senator. All right. Are we ready for the question? All those in favor of Senator Schuler's motion to adopt Committee of the Whole Amendment number 1, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say no. The chair is in doubt. All those in favor, please rise. All those opposed, please rise. All right, so we had, you didn't count, okay, gotcha. So it's 15 ayes and 14 noes. So the motion for Committee of the Whole, Amendment number 1, to House Bill 199 has passed. We're back on the bill. With that, reading clerk, would you read in the House Bill 199, Committee of the Whole, Amendment number 2?
House Bill 199, Committee of the Whole, Amendment number 2 to engrossed copy, delete.
Senator Boner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move Committee of the Whole Amendment number 2 to House Bill 199, ask for the body's favorable consideration. Fellow senators, this amendment is kind of a variation on the theme of the one we just listened to with important differences. This takes a more measured approach to getting to a fully universal system. So it is still a universal program if you're interested in that. What it does, though, is it provides for a tiered means tested system for next school year only. So the 25-26 school year will have a more robust means-tested system than what we just barely passed there, where we retain the current $6,000 level, but we step it down on a linear basis. For every 50% of the federal poverty level that the family in question goes up, you lose $1,000 total. We get to 400% of the poverty level without $1,000 mark. So certainly not going to pretend to be an attorney about the constitutionality concerns of whether the means test for the necessary support of the poor is valid or not, but recognize that that argument is out there. And it poses a legal risk to this bill if it passes into law. And so it's important, I think, first and foremost, to recognize that we have a pretty significant cliff right now with the amendment that we just passed. It's also a reason why I was so disappointed in the line item vetoes last year, is that it creates that cliff effect. If you make $1 more over that 250%, you lose almost $4,000 worth of benefits per kid. For families, that could be a lot with more than one kid that may want to take advantage of this program. So this helps smooth that out from the bill as it stands now, and it provides opportunity to help hedge against that legal risk. So if we go to full universal at a later point, and that is the tipping point for the courts or even the trigger for a lawsuit, then at least we have a program in this bill that is a little bit more generous with the means test. It has a nice slope, so we avoid the cliff effect of disincentivizing people from improving their income. And it's also an opportunity for us and for the departments to get our hands around how much the demand's going to be, so we can have a better idea for what the appropriation should be come next year. So this is a little bit, we'll be running, not sprinting, towards a universal system. It's still very much a universal system if you pass the amendment, but just with a little bit of caution, both from an administrative standpoint as well as a legal standpoint. So that's the amendment. I'll stand for questions.
Thank you, Senator Boner. Senator Barlow, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think I understood the explanation, except when I get to page 2 of the amendment, lines 13 through 15, and basically the stair stepping is 1 year. After that, it's full on 7,000, anybody who applies. So I want to be clear that this amendment may have been, maybe it was maybe it was incorrectly described, but it's only 1 year of the means testing, and after that, it is full-on universal. If I'm incorrect in how I interpret that, I appreciate being corrected, but that's the way I read it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Oh. Go ahead, Senator Bonner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That is a correct interpretation. 1 year, next school year of a means test. Every year after that, universal, $7,000 per student.
Senator Hicks, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I wasn't crazy about the last amendment because of the mean testing, but this certainly teases it out, broadens it to a little more people potentially eligible for this program. I do think this amendment's divisible, getting to the second year. I'm not going to do that. We can vote it up or down, get to second reading, but I do think this absolutely is a little better way to approach this for right now, given the explanation by the sponsor, and I would encourage you to support this amendment.
All right. Senator Olson, go ahead.
Got to weigh in here. I know everyone's probably pretty much made up their mind, but I see this amendment as the middle ground. The last amendment that we debated and voted on really proved what this body feels is the right thing to do in this bill, and what it proved is that it's pretty much a 50-50 split in this chamber. So I think that this amendment takes best of both worlds. On the need-based scholarship, it increases those that would receive it. So I think that should be a positive thing for those who were in favor of that. And then for those who were in favor of universal, obviously this gets you one step closer to that. So I would really encourage an aye vote on this.
Senator Rothfuss, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment is absolutely not middle ground. This amendment is 1 year of middle ground, and then what we just voted against a moment ago for the rest of time and eternity. So if you didn't like, if you liked the last amendment, you're not going to like this amendment. It's quite contrary. It basically repeals the last. If you could remove the second Romanette, which is not divisible, to be clear, you can't just remove the second Romanette. There's no divisibility available. If you could, that might be middle ground. So maybe middle ground could come on second reading, but on and against this amendment, this is absolutely not middle ground.
All right. Are you ready for the question? I'm hearing there are no further questions. All those in favor of Senator Boner's motion to adopt Committee of the Whole Amendment Number 2 to House Bill 199, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say no. Chair is in doubt. So all those in favor of Senator Boner's motion, stand. I'm standing, by the way. Okay. You can sit down, 14 ayes. All those opposed, please. Did you count me, by the way? Did you count? Okay, just making sure. All those opposed, please stand. Fifteen noes. So, motion to adopt Committee of the Whole Amendment Number 2, House Bill 199, has failed. So we are back on the bill. Question? Ready. Ready to vote on the bill? Oh. Senator Nethercott.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I appreciate the constitutional scholars in the room. I find that really inspiring. What I do question with all of the help that you've received from outside counsel of all walks of life, in the state, out of the state, all of the specialists on educational constitutional law, did any of them ever help craft a constitutional amendment? Was that ever advised? And did they help draft that language for a bill to amend our state's constitution to avoid this issue? Or was that not the motivation? Make sure we're not being grifted by an entire industry focused on litigating these cases across the country. On and for the bill.
Senator Scott, go ahead.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, in response to that, the obvious attempt, and it's not hard to draft that particular constitutional amendment, you just need to repeal certain things that are in the Constitution. But this cumbersome process, so that the thought was, let's see what we can do within the Constitution. And they were telling us that they had had success. I think the evidence is they had elsewhere. Whether that will apply in Wyoming, who knows? Mr. Chairman, there was a question asked earlier about the $7,000 figure in there. That was developed based on what the actual tuitions are in private schools across the state. Now that's very different from the figure for our public schools, which is $18,000 per person or $21,000 per person, depending on whether you count, I think whether you count the federal funds or not. We're much more expensive in the public system. It's not clear why. Some of it may be special ed and transportation. Some of it, a little of it might be CTE, but those things don't anywhere near account for that difference. And we were unable to discover in committee what the cause of that difference is, but it is clearly a difference in the cost. And that's something maybe our recalibration people need to take a look at as to what are the private schools doing that is so much more economical, because they are providing good education. So, Mr. Chairman, but the 7,000 figure is based on what the actual tuition that's being charged in many of the private schools are. And then summing up, one of the witnesses, Mr. Chairman, that testified in the Joint Interim Committee, who was a local resident. And what he said was that competition breeds excellence. That's what this bill is bringing to our public education system. And I would suggest to you that passing and implementing this bill will breed excellence, both in the private schools that'll have to compete and in the public schools that now don't have to compete and are trying to defend their monopoly. On and for the bill, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On and against the bill, we had the constitutional discussion. I think that's still very applicable and relevant. This is unconstitutional. But the idea that our schools are going to improve if we implement this and we'll have that excellence delivered is just denied by a simple look around the country. These policies are relatively commonplace in other states at this point. And I would challenge anyone to point to a state that implemented this that's performing as well as the state of Wyoming in education. Our public education system is exceptional. It is among the very best of the best in the country. We are fortunate, particularly for a rural state, to have the incredible educators that we have, the incredible schools that we have, the resources available. We're fortunate. The idea that we would try and fundamentally change that system denies the reality of the system that we operate in and the luxury that we operate within. Mr. Chairman, furthermore, the one thing that we've realized that we've been lacking and had been lacking for as long as I've served on the Education Committee is a pre-K system that was available to all students. And that's been unfortunate. We haven't found the capacity to put forward a pre-K system that would be fully funded, would be broadly available, and would meet the needs of the public. Well, when this legislation, this ESA legislation passed last year, the only feature that it had, Mr. Chairman, that I thought was favorable, and I voted for the version that we had come through this chamber last year for this reason, was that it offered pre-K assistance, so that the families that did need support because they couldn't afford pre-K and didn't have access to that through our public education system would have access to that. This bill eliminates that program. It eliminates it entirely. The pre-K is zeroed out. This program's only been around for a couple of months. It's only been live and online for a couple of months, what's already on statute. And we already have 44 pre-K students enrolled in the state of Wyoming because of the program that was put in place last year. 44 students. 44 students that will lose their funding if we pass this. Zeroed out. You're welcome. Thanks for participating. You needed the help. We gave you the help. This bill destroys that help. Now, how is that for keeping our word as a state? Honestly, I have no idea why that's removed. That was the upside. That was the best part. It was even constitutional, probably, certainly with the means testing. So all we're left with at this point in time is taking the resources away from those families in need that have their kids in pre-K, and then making this universal to the point where it's fully unconstitutional, diminishing the high-quality education system that we've established in the state of Wyoming, and saying that competition is good. We don't need the competition. We need to appreciate the incredible system we have right now and continue to support it, Mr. Chairman. On and against.
Senator Landon, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So let's talk about the money. You know, the money, according to my emails, is the biggest issue for the folks back in my district. It's a big deal. They want to know why we're going to come up with whatever amount we're going to come up with, and we're going to pay folks to keep their kids at home. It's an unparalleled to compare that figure, whatever we decide it's going to be, with what it costs to go to a public school system. You know, my friend from around the mountain says $18,000 a student. Well, it's not that, not in his community, it's about 11. And we pay for things like tracks and football stadiums and band equipment and theaters and all those classrooms, including, and he mentioned the CTE, absolutely. You ever buy a computer numerical control milling machine? How about a diesel engine? They're expensive. There's a lot of expenses that go in, and a lot of it's physical plant. So you can't really compare what's going on in the public schools with what we're talking about. It's an apple and an orange. That money figure is a big deal to my people back home. I don't think, other than those healthcare things that come through every year, I have never gotten this amount of emails ever on one bill. That's one of the issues. And I get questions like this. So as this bill moves along, and I want to try to get there, just for the record, I'm not trying to kill anything. I'm just trying to share what's coming to me from back home. What happens when a student comes back in a year? Do they pay any of this back? What happens to the students who leave the school, but they want to come back and they want to be in band, they want to be on the forensics team, or they want to play football, they want to be in the basketball court where we have to turn the lights on and we have to maintain that gymnasium? I'm just talking boots on the ground. What exactly is this bill going to do to all of that? So we've got a little ways to go to help the people back home. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Actually, Mr. Boner, I think the president behind you was up. You got, okay, all right. Go ahead, Senator Boner.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to point out that, we've heard a lot from especially the education establishment and their communication network. And I understand that, but let's recognize the fact that we've made quite a few changes in this chamber. This is a bill that's getting increasingly similar to the one we passed last year, and without that same sort of consternation. So I point out that we did put the accountability back in, the testing requirements, same as it currently is in law. We now have a means test, which is similar to the discussion we had last year. So I think a lot of the concerns were overblown to begin with, especially this concern that we're just going to drain funding from the public schools because of loss of enrollment. Well, Mr. Chairman, we've been losing enrollment for 10 years now. That's been the trend. I imagine this may affect that a little bit, but we also have our supplemental budget where we increase funding for our government schools, as we have every year except for once, it's 1997. And so we see the trend of declining enrollment in our public schools and ever increasing funding in spite of that decline. So I think that with the bill is the way it is now, especially, a lot of those concerns have been alleviated. The state concerns have been taken care of, absolutely, about lack of accountability and too much spending for this program. This is a different bill than when it started, Mr. Chairman. So I think we're getting to a point where we are reflecting of where we were last year, of course, with the notable exception of the lack of pre-K. That's a change, for sure. So I'd just like to point that out, Mr. Chairman.
Great. Senator Jones, you have the floor.
I just have so many questions about this bill. It's such an important bill, and it's really, really important to the people in the state of Wyoming. Why was this not an interim bill? I mean, this thing looks like it's been amended a ton. We're sitting here trying to amend it. Why didn't we really work this out before we're listening to it on the floor? We don't have any provisions for the kids who are gonna fall through the cracks. Who's gonna make sure that those kids are learning? We're gonna take a test, we're gonna make them take a test. Not gonna do anything if those kids completely fall behind or don't even make it to the finish line. Why didn't we let the bill that we passed last year work through the system a little bit to see what we already had right or what we already had wrong? We're starting from scratch, and we're working with our most important commodity, our children. I want this bill to be good, and I want to be able to pass it through here. This is very important, and I don't know that we're all moving in the right direction here. I think these are serious issues. I think we haven't even touched on a lot of things that this bill doesn't even address. What are we going to do about sports, extracurricular activities? Who's going to pay for those things for these kids who are homeschooled? They should still have these opportunities. But should the school have to just pay for that without getting funding for it? Where are we going with this? This is very important. These are important questions, and these aren't just my questions. These are questions from my constituents.
Senator Cooper, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Over the last few years, I pushed back on this type of bill. Last year, I got on board because of the feedback I got from my constituents in my smaller districts regarding the pre-K funding to help with that. Because in several of these smaller towns, we didn't have a pre-K system. We're working through that. We're getting it up and running, and now we're going to take it away. So the feedback I'm getting now is overwhelmingly against this. They're saying, let's see what we're doing with the program that's there and see if it's going to work. We haven't given the program that's there a fair chance. I think this bill is premature. Might be something we want to look at in a couple more years, but we spent a lot of time and effort on this last year, and we never gave that program a chance. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. President, go ahead.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good debate. Let's bring it back to who this is about. It's about the kids. And it's not an indictment on our public school system. I want to push back on that clearly and strongly. This is about a handful, this is a scholarship program. This isn't just handing checks out. So let's keep that in mind. We're setting up a scholarship program, and I'll joke and I'll say if we want to make it constitutional, let's run it through the business council, because we launder a lot of money through the business council to make it constitutional, to give away money to businesses by the millions. So I'll joke about that, but seriously, all jokes aside, we're dealing with about 92,000 K through 12 students in the state of Wyoming. Averages across the nation for when universal school choice rolls out in other states, the adoption rate's roughly 1.7%. What does that mean for Wyoming? About 1,500 students taking a $7,000 scholarship. What's the situation, Mr. Chairman? Well, they're probably not homeschoolers, because we've heard from the homeschoolers, leave us alone, we don't want this, don't hurt us, we're not taking the money, we're out, peace. Okay, so the homeschoolers are good, they're taken care of. What about folks like me who, my kids are in a great public school system, blue ribbon schools. Great, getting a world-class education. They're not going anywhere. So who are we talking about, Mr. Chairman? How about the kids that are maybe being bullied in their school? Maybe kids that have some mental health problems? Maybe kids that have dyslexia or some learning disability that their parents would love to have another option for some remedial help? Those are the people we're trying to help with this scholarship. And this scholarship is a great idea. I think it deserves our attention. It has had our attention for many years. We've had it as an interim topic, but for a while, the folks at the other end of the hall were very opposed to this on the Education Committee. And that's why it always failed. Those in this chamber have been pushing this and supported this. The voters spoke, seats have changed, there's a new Education Committee, and the voters will continue to speak on this issue. This is a very important issue to them. So we owe it to them, and we owe it to ourselves, and we owe it to the kids to keep working this through the process. So on and for the bill. Thank you.
All right. Question having been called, all those in favor of Senator Schuler's motion that the Committee of Whole rise and report, that do so with a favorable recommendation of House Bill 199, say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. Ayes have it. House Bill 199 has passed the committee of the whole. Oh. Majority Floor Leader, you're recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the committee of the whole rise and report.
Okay. So all those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. All right, Mr. President, El Presidente.
Not bad for a freshman there, Senator. Committee of the whole report.
Mr. President, the Committee of the Whole, having had under considerations bills on general file, begs leave to report as follows. House Bill 166 do pass. House Bill 93 failed to pass Committee of the Whole and was indefinitely postponed. House Bill 86 engrossed do pass. House Bill 199 engrossed do pass amended. Senator Smith, Chairman.
Senator Smith.
You've heard the motion. All in favor? Oh, sorry, guys. One more down. Mr. President, I move for the adoption of the Committee of the Whole report.
There you go. All those in favor say aye. All opposed, no. Motion carries. The Committee of the Whole report has been adopted. Good job. Happy Valentine's Day. Ladies, do we have any reports? We're good. All right, Madam Majority Floor Leader, that clears the desk.
Mr. President, I move that we stand adjourned until 10 a.m. Tuesday, February. Until next Tuesday in February. Let me pull the date up. Oh, I don't have the 18th. Let me try that again, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move that we stand adjourned until 10 a.m. Tuesday, February 18th, 2025. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Madam Majority Floor Leader. All right, announcements. Senator Landon.
Mr. President, thank you so much. We're going to take a 2 or 3 day break over and travel, but then we're going to come back on Tuesday morning, Mr. President. We're going to meet at 8 a.m. in W4 downstairs. That's the Wind River Room. And we're going to take up House Bill 5, engrossed fishing outfitters and guides, registration of fishing boats. And if we have some time, we'll take up House Bill 211, engrossed hunting wildlife from vehicles. And that's Tuesday morning, Mr. President.
All right, sounds good. Senator Pappas.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Transportation, Highways, Military Affairs Committee will meet Tuesday morning at 8 a.m. in the extension and online to consider House Bill 116, driver's license unauthorized alien restrictions, House Bill 226, engrossed license plate search and rescue council, and if time permits, we'll be looking at House Bill 132 engrossed, annual permits for specified commercial loads.
Thank you. Senator Olson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Judiciary will meet on Tuesday after the break in room W006 upon the noon recess to continue its hearing of House Bill 172 engrossed, repeal gun-free zones and preemption amendments.
Thank you. Anybody else? Mr. Vice President.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Senate Appropriations Committee will meet on Tuesday noon recess in room 113, HB 316 school finance model recalibration, HB 33 vehicle sales and use tax distribution highway funds, and re-referrals if time permits. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other announcements? Seeing none, you've all heard the Majority Floor Leader's motion. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, no. Senate will stand adjourned until 10 a.m. Tuesday, February 18th.